What's up, nerds? So this in front of you is an Aventurine calculator. This is an incredibly well-made damage calculator, but it's not just any old damage calculator. This is incredibly well-made. You can even make a build right here and then compare the other build to another build that you could be working on, right? You can go down here on the bottom and you can switch to build 1 and build 2. And as you can see, the stats do change for some of these things. You can change each of these individual stats yourself in order to compare anything that you could be using on your account to anything else you could be trying to compare. For example, you might be comparing certain relic pieces together with another relic piece. You can go ahead and change these relic pieces yourself if you feel so inclined. You could also compare your crit damage, very heavily crit damage based Aventurine versus a defense based Aventurine, because that's a big talk of the town right now, because yeah, Aventurine scales off of defense, and so it's a big question that a lot of us have had, like what's gonna be better, defense or crit, you know, things like that. You can also change the buffs that Aventurine could be getting from your supports as well. This is an incredibly well-made sheet. I can't say enough good things about it. And when we are going to compare, we are going to I'm going to show you guys how to use this sheet, right? We're going to go ahead and go over the notes. That way we can go over how to use this sheet, because I understand that the first time somebody looks at one of these sheets, it might be a little bit confusing on how to use it. So let's go ahead and dive in. But first, I want to thank the IPC. The IPC are the people that made this sheet. No, not the IPC from the game. These guys are so cool that, yeah, this is probably the first sheet they've ever made, and they're calling themselves the IPC because Aventurine's part of the IPC. That's honestly pretty badass, if you ask me. These dudes want to remain anonymous as far as I know, because a lot of the people that help make this sheet want to remain anonymous. I wish I could shout them out. So if you want to spread them some love, go ahead and in the comments of this video say like, thank you IPC, or I want to suck your honker IPC, something like that. That way if they do happen to see this video, they can at least know that their hard work has been appreciated. So let's go ahead and read the notes and go over how to kind of use the sheet so you guys can come and use this for yourself. Oh yeah, and Editor Pancake here, there's a link to this sheet in the pinned comment and description below. The notes here say, disclaimer, Concert for 2 is likely not an event like Cone. Don't build around it if you're expecting to be free. The reason why I mentioned Concert for 2 and they're mentioning Concert for 2 is this will become available during his banner. It's going to be a gacha cone, not like something you can just easily get your hands on. So Concert for 2, be aware of that when you're building for him. You probably shouldn't rely on Concert for 2 for your calculations, because it's going to be too hard to get. And I've already looked at some calculations and done some calculations with a friend here. Concert for 2 is not as good as a lot of people think it might end up being. So there's a lot of better options, and we will go over some of these other calculations that aren't on the sheet itself per se, just so that I can show you guys some other things that we also compared in terms of the light cones themselves. So let's get into this. With the notes here, it says make a copy by going to File, make a copy so you can use the calculator. You can't use the original. You won't be able to change the numbers on the original. That way you don't screw over them with their spreadsheet. So you make a copy here. We're just going to make a copy. Cool. Make sure to include a % for any percentage, base substat, and no % for any flat substats. Relevant stats are on the top. So what they mean by that is, as you can see here, this is a defense substat that matters. So if you put, like, let's just say 87 flat defense, you don't need and you don't put a percentage on that. And if it's a defense piece like this, you're not going to put a flat number here because it's a percentage. Like if I remove this, that's going to be a problem. You don't want to do that. You want to keep that percentage piece there. Okay. So you can, like I said, come in here, change the stats, right, to whatever you might want to use. Don't forget if it's like 89 or 98 crit damage, whatever, like you put those in there. Okay. So just make sure that you enter all of your stats in for the different pieces you want to use for the sheet. However, they are needed to be put in. Okay. Now let's get rid of that 87 just in case. Like I said, you can come over here. You can change the different relic pieces to whatever you might be using for Aventurine. And they're obviously going to put the ones that are actually worthwhile. They're not going to throw every relic up here. You're only going to be able to see the ones that are actually going to matter for an Aventurine build. You can also see the stats over here on the left. that they use for their calculations, and you can probably change things up based on that. In fact, if you go over here, let's just get rid of this 16 and put in 10. You'll see that the crit damage number changes on his stats. So this right here on the right is what you're essentially building whenever you change the stats for this guy. And you might notice that without the buffs, this is already a pretty good build. He's going to give himself a ton of crit rate in combat, so this number is not as low as you think. Because once he gives himself all the buff, as you can see, this MFer has a 100% crit rate and 248 crit damage. This is kind of a cracked Aventurine as it is right now. So your Aventurine may or may not be as good as this when you're building it for the comparison. So just keep that in mind. And then down here, in order to basically use one of these buffs, or like to click on or click off of one of these, you literally just click it on or click it off. For Ruan Mei, you want that speed buff active, then you make sure the speed buff is active. If you don't want it active, you turn it off, right? Aventurine's tech defense buff, well, if you turn it on or off, you can immediately see the numbers changing here. You can immediately see these change in real time. So make sure that all of these are clicked on that need to be clicked on or clicked off. You don't want to overcompensate or like think that your Aventurine is better than it really is. Make sure that you're being fair in your comparisons or your calculations to make sure that this is all correct. Now, obviously, after you're done with that, you go over to build 2, and then you put a build 2 in here. You're comparing different relic pieces together, different light cones, for example, in order to be able to make these calculations for yourself. Let's go back to the summary just to make sure we didn't miss anything. Check the team buffs and include your support talent levels and stats. So yeah, you can do even that here, okay? Make sure that you compare you can see that there's different stacks, there's different levels to the different buffs you could be giving. Make sure that all of these are correct for the different things you could be using. As you can see, you have miscellaneous equipment, broken keel is active here. Make sure that everything that you could possibly potentially be using is active while you are creating these comparisons for each other. Make sure to change his Eidolon level if you want to toggle on his Eidolon buffs or not. You might be curious of what the damage comparison might be between his Eidolon 1 versus his Eidolon 2. With the click of a button, you can turn on his Eidolon 1 or Eidolon 2. It's actually kind of sick. You can put two builds and compare them. That's like the best part of this whole sheet, right? That's the coolest thing that you could possibly do here. So you see 1921 or 1912, whatever. Let's just for the giggles, right? Obviously, this is going to be an incorrect, impossible to get relic piece here. But let's just go ahead and go back to summary. And as you can see, we noticed an increase in the overall damage for the character because we made a change. So come back and you can see on the summary, it'll show you the damage comparisons. It'll even give you the percentage of difference between each individual effect that he could possibly have going on here. Now let's go ahead and move forward. Do not change any of the cells besides where you input relic substats. So don't change anything other than you should, or you might accidentally goof something up. And if you do it without realizing that you did, you might be comparing the wrong things to each other. So just make sure that when you are doing this, that everything is correct and you don't accidentally change something that you shouldn't be changing, okay? Like especially something like over here, you don't want to change anything and that you just be changing the substats, okay? Just change that stuff. I was able to use this sheet to essentially find out that the defense version of Aventurine versus the crit version of Aventurine is not that much different in terms of its damage, but it is vastly different in terms of its survivability. The defense version of Aventurine has so much more survivability because of the added defense. It's way safer and just way more comfy. And again, the damage difference is really, really not that much. A crit damage body versus a defense body is a difference of 3%. That is not much at all. It really is not much. So to be perfectly honest with you, I'm going to be building an Aventurine that does crit a little bit because he gives himself 48, that's right, 48% crit rate in the middle of combat if you have him built for 4,000 defense. The 4,000 defense number is the number you need to hit with Aventurine. That's the other thing about building a crit Aventurine. If you build a crit Aventurine, it's going to be harder to get to the 4,000 defense mark. It's like building a Ruan Mei. You need to hit 180 break effect while you're in battle in order to proc one of her own personal effects. It's the same thing with Aventurine. He needs to have 4,000 defense in order to proc his own crit rate buff. And it's a big crit rate buff. It's like a Jingli Yu size crit rate buff. So you're going to want this. And if you build too much into crit damage, you're not going to get it. So my personal opinion is build enough crit damage on him to be able to hit like between 120% crit damage and roughly 140. So between 120 and like 140 crit damage, and you should be good to go. And then put everything else into defense. That way you're not missing out on some of the crit damage he could be getting. But just remember that the problem with crit damage on a character that doesn't deal some like massive amount of damage, like Aventurine, he's not going to be dealing as much damage as a normal DPS. So he doesn't get as much out of his crits as a normal DPS will get. It's too bad he doesn't have more damage multipliers in his own kit, because his crits would be so much better if it was. It's unfortunate. That's why he's going to be really, really good with a character such as Ruan Mei, who gives you such a high damage buff, right? So it's going to be really, really good pairing him with someone like Ruan Mei. Of course, all the other follow-up characters and other cool things like that. There's lots of really great teams he could work with. But Ruan Mei, for his damage, is going to be good. That's just a random comparison, right? Let's go ahead and take a look at some other things here, okay? A friend of mine, we were looking at this sheet together, and we were able to go over a few different interesting comparisons, okay? We used this sheet in order to help us come to these comparisons, and Destiny Threads is the free-to-play option for Aventurine as far as a light cone goes, and this is the one that I think everyone needs to use as a baseline. This right here is Destiny Threads for Woven. This is the light cone from the Forgotten Hall shop that everybody can get, and everybody can take to Superimposition 5. So you're going to get 20% effect res at S5, and for every 100 defense the wearer has, it increases the wearer's damage dealt by 1.2% to a maximum damage increase of 48%. What's that stat that I was just telling you about that we wish Aventurine had more of? Oh, overall damage buff? Oh, that's coming right out of this cone. Isn't that nice? Isn't that sexy? Isn't that easy breezy beautiful cover girl? So this is the baseline. This is not as good as his signature. This is not as good as Gepard's light cone. And at S5, it's not as good as Concert for 2. Concert for 2 is going to be the new light cone that's part of the gacha system. And yes, technically, it's better than Destiny Threads, but only if you have superimpositions of it. What did I just say? It's a part of the gacha system. So you're probably not going to have this at Superimposition 5, for example, to be able to beat out the power output of Threads. Now, here's the thing. At Superimposition 1 of Concert for 2, it's worse than Destiny Threads. At Superimposition 2, it's roughly as good as Destiny Threads. And at Superimposition 3, then it finally becomes better than Destiny Threads. So there you go. S3 of Concert for 2 is better than Destiny Threads. So that's why I say that Destiny Threads is the baseline. If you get really, really lucky on the gacha system, then Concert for 2 could be better. But here's why I'm going to say don't invest into Concert for 2. For most people, are going to want to build Destiny Threads unless they have Gepard's Cone. If you have Gepard's Cone's probably the choice you want to make. Because as you can tell, Gepard's Cone is not that much worse than his signature light cone. I need to reiterate this. This is probably the worst signature light cone for any character I've seen up to this point. Because they want to build into what Aventurine does well, which is his own personal damage. But guys, the best part of Aventurine's light cone isn't even the damage you get off of it. Here's the light cone from Hoyo themselves. It increases the wearer's defense by 40%. Nice stat. That's cool. That's good. That's survivability and extra damage. You get 40% crit damage. Nice. But the best part about this light cone is actually the last part here. It's the debuff. When the wearer's follow-up attack hits the enemy target, there is a 100% chance to increase the damage taken by the attacked enemy target by 10%, lasting for 2 turns. This is really good because this allows your main DPS to deal increased damage, or your entire team will deal increased damage, but let's be honest, it mostly takes effect because of your main DPS's damage. This debuffs the enemies as well, which does trigger Acheron's talent, by the way. So he has his own debuff, which will trigger her talent, and this light cone, every time you get a follow-up attack, is going to end up triggering his talent, or sorry, her talent as well. So it's yet another trigger. It's the worst investment you could make for a light cone, in my opinion. Listen, if he's your favorite character in the whole game, pull it. Pull it. Don't let me tell you don't let me stop you. Okay? If you love the dude, if he's your husbando, pull it. Pull it. Pull him, pull it, do it. I don't care. Just go for it. I'm just saying, for the sake of meta, for the sake of value for your account, it is the worst investment of Jade or real-life money you could possibly be making on a light cone. I think this is the worst gacha light cone for a signature possibly ever released in the game. And that, I think it's not even close. This is just not that good. Look at Gepard's cone. Look at how much work Gepard's cone is putting in. And you could put this on any other defense unit, or any other preservation unit, I should say. Right? It's gonna work on basically any defense unit or any preservation unit. You don't really need his signature because you don't really care too much about the other effects of his signature unless it's on him, right? Do any other preservation units have a follow-up attack that can apply this debuff? No. Okay, wait, I forgot about March 7th, but honestly, who cares, right? Do any other preservation units care about having this crit damage? Ruan maybe, and that's about it. And the defense bonus, Ruan could use the bonus. A lot of people don't realize that defense is actually good on her, but you probably don't need this cone. There's probably other options that are going to work just as well, if not, potentially even better. So if I could summarize this as best as I possibly can, Destiny Threads is the baseline. Every player can get this and take it to Super Imposition 5. This is the baseline right here. If you get really lucky in the gacha system and you can get Concert for 2 to at least Super Imposition 3, consider it. However, you may just want to buy Moment of Glory, Gepard's signature light cone, from the shop. Because as long as you have enough Starlight, you can actually just straight up buy this thing from the shop itself, right? If you're pulling on Aventurine, you're going to end up getting a ton of Starlight anyway. So just consider that, right? That's definitely one of the best options you could have. I don't care about his signature at all because Gepard's cone is also technically accessible by every single player in the entire game if they just build enough toward it, right? So I personally think Gepard's cone is great. I actually have to take back something I said from my previous video about the light cone. I said that Destiny Threads is the best free-to-play option, and that is technically true, but I kind of forgot about the fact that you can just use your Starlight to buy this if you don't get it from the gacha system. So Gepard's cone, actually super duper sweet. Actually super duper good. Now, none of these cones are bad. Any of these cones would be good for him. So this is what you should be looking at. This is what you should be aiming for based on what you could potentially be doing on your account. Okay? So that's basically the video. I just wanted to show you guys this sheet. And I want you guys, again, to thank the IPC for this because this sheet is incredibly well made. This is really, really awesome to compare not only like crit versions of him versus defense versions of him, but in case you want to try out different relics and different light cones and other things like that, you have the option to potentially do that with this sheet. So, if you found any of this helpful or informative in any way, shape, or form, consider leaving a like and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one when I do a build guide for Aventurine so that we can go into this even deeper.